Jazz is not about learning hundreds of scales. One scale does 90% of the work. After teaching jazz for almost 20 years, I've seen again and again how focusing on this one scale and actually learning how to use it changed everything for my students. So in this video, I'm going to show you the scale that I'm talking about, the exercises you need to work on, and how to use it to make your solos sound like real jazz. By the end of this video, you'll have a focused, practical way to practice so that every scale and exercise that you work on actually levels up your playing. Instead of trying to learn 20 scales at the same time, you should work on improving much more important things in your playing, like melody, rhythm, and phrasing. Now, as you probably already guessed, I'm talking about the major scale. Why the major scale? Because it is the foundation of most jazz music. It covers the most ground and contains most of the chords. It's not the only scale you need, but if you really dig into the major scale, you'll sound a lot better and it will be a lot easier to learn other scales later. It's just like learning a language. Master the most common words and you can actually have conversations, memorizing uncommon words, and you can't even order coffee. And that's also why I'm not a huge fan of modes, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's look at what you actually need to learn and practice to get your playing to sound like real jazz. My approach to practicing scales is shaped by what I learned from Barry Harris in his masterclasses in The Hague. His practical approach is one of the most efficient methods I've ever come across. Let's start simple. Play 2 octaves of the C major scale. When you learn any scale, it's useful to know what notes are in there. C, D, E, F, G, A. And of course also to understand the intervals relative to the root. So root, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and so on. This is basic stuff every jazz musician should know, but you don't want to get stuck overthinking it while you're playing. This is for when you're analyzing something. Now, of course, if all you do is run up and down the scale, your solos will get so boring that you might fall asleep yourself while playing them. So what should you actually practice? Now, this is where the scale really proves its value, because the way you approach the major scale makes it so much easier and faster to learn every other scale later. You're not just learning the notes, you're building a system that works for all scales and actually helps you to play jazz. When you improvise in jazz, your melodies need to follow the chords of the song. If you're playing a song in C major, a lot of those chords are found in the C major scale. So the next step is learning how to find those chords within the scale. I'm going to show you how this fits into an essential jazz progression, a 2-5-1, in just a second. But first, let's make sure you have an overview of the chords in the scale. The chords in the scale are called diatonic chords, and finding them is a fairly simple process. A chord is really just a stack of thirds. So we're in C major. If I take the C, now the diatonic third above C is E. And if I add another diatonic third, then I have a G. And that's a C major triad. And like this, you can build diatonic triads on every note in the scale. And then you get this. C, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and C major. But jazz loves a little bit of extra flavor in the harmony, so songs use the 7th chords. And luckily, this really just means adding one more third on top. And now you get these chords. C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G 7, A minor 7, B half diminished, and C major 7. Now, of course, you also want to notice that I'm actually not playing these 7th chords as stacks of thirds, because C major 7 as a stack of thirds would be like this. And the reason for that is that some of the chords get really difficult to play and we don't actually play them like that very often. So E minor would be like this, and this voicing for E minor is just much nicer. Now this is what is called a drop 2 voicing, but hopefully this is also one of the voicings that you already know, that you've seen before and that you're recognizing, which is just as important as playing it in a stack of thirds. So why are these diatonic chords so important? Well, they are the building blocks of the jazz chord progressions. Knowing them also helps you understand all the chord progressions that you're going to come across in the key of C major. And the most important progression is probably the 2-5-1, which is really just D minor 7, the 2nd chord in the row, moving up to the 5th chord, the G7, and then resolving to the C major 7, the 1st chord. And a way to play these chords so they flow a little bit better into each other would be this. The 2-5-1 progression is everywhere in jazz. It's probably the most common progression. So by knowing your scale and how to pull out these chords, you're already halfway to understanding hundreds of jazz songs. And here's why this is so powerful. All these chords are inside the scale, and that means that often you stay with one scale, but the important notes change with the chords. The scale is the big picture, and the chords are how the music flows. But how do you turn all those chords into real flowing melodies in your solos? Let's explore that. Before we get into the specific exercises and the Barry Harris approach, let's zoom in on what you actually need from the scale when you're soloing. Like I mentioned earlier, when you improvise in jazz, you're not just running up and down the scale, you're following the chords. And the goal is to make your melodies clearly outline what's happening in the chord progression. And the simplest, most effective way to do that, play the notes of the chord itself, what we call the arpeggio. Now, if you take the row of diatonic arpeggios from C major and turn each one of those into an arpeggio, you can practice them through the scale and instantly get the strongest raw material for soloing. Now, if you just focus on the 3 arpeggios from the 2-5-1, so D minor 7, G7 and C major 7, then you get these. And of course, played straight, this still sounds like an exercise, but here's where it gets interesting. As soon as you start mixing up the order of the notes and connecting one arpeggio to the next, you can create lines that actually sound like a melody, something that flows through the chord changes. And remember, the scale is always there around the arpeggio. As you get more comfortable, you can add scale notes along with the arpeggios to create even richer, more interesting solos. But you're still working on very sort of exercise sounding things. Let's look at how to become more flexible with what we're using. You already have the exercises where you play the diatonic 7th chord in the scale, but there's another super useful option, learning the diatonic triads. As you'll see in a moment, triads are also fantastic material for soloing, and then we can get to the Barry Harris inspired exercises. Let me show you how to use these. Remember, when you created 7th chords, you started by stacking thirds, so C, E, and G, to create a C major triad, and then you added another third on top to get the 7th chord. Now, if you look at the notes in the 3 chords of a 2-5-1, so D minor 7, G7, and C major 7, you'll notice something interesting. The top 3 notes of each chord is actually a triad. So on D minor you have an F major triad, G7 has a B diminished, and C major 7 has an E minor triad. And these are all great for solo lines as well. Check this out. So for soloing, it really pays off to know your scale, the diatonic 7th chord and the diatonic triads. Knowing which notes are in each chord helps you connect other arpeggios and triads to your lines as well, and gives you a lot more options. Remember that this is true for any scale you use, not just the major scale. All of these basics give you a clear overview of the notes, the harmony, and how everything fits together. But here's the big point. You want to use this knowledge to make music, not just run exercises. So when you come up with what to practice, always keep your soloing goals in mind. And that brings us to some of the really creative Barry Harris inspired exercises, where you turn these building blocks into real jazz vocabulary. Let's dive into those next. One of the things that completely changed after I attended my first Barry Harris masterclass in The Hague was that I had a much smarter, more efficient way to practice scales. Several times during the masterclass, while Barry was teaching us great bebop lines and explaining how they worked, he'd take a building block, a piece of jazz vocabulary, and turn that into a scale exercise. Now, this direct connection between what you want to play in your solos and what you practice in your scales makes your practice so much more efficient. I'm going to cover some of the more advanced exercises in a bit, but the basic example, which you might have heard me talk about before, is playing the diatonic arpeggios as a triplet with a leading note. This is basically instant Charlie Parker. I'm sure you recognize this sound because everybody uses it, and that opens the door to lines like this. You have to remember that if your solo doesn't sound good, more scales won't solve your problem. Learning hypochondrian flat 6 is not really going to make you sound any better on a blues in F, and practicing the scale is just distracting you from much more important things in your playing, the melodies that you create. And this is also why I don't push students into modes. Mastering the major scale already gives you the sound and tools that you need for most jazz. So instead of wasting time on running scales and modes, Barry showed us how to turn the major scale into real jazz vocabulary by reshaping it into musical building blocks. Now, one of the best examples of this is the pivot arpeggio. Let's dig into how that works and why it's such a powerful tool for jazz improvisation. This is a very simple but very powerful concept, and Barry Harris taught it to us as an exercise. Instead of just playing the arpeggio straight up like this, you add a twist and play the first note an octave higher, adding this beautiful melodic interval skip afterwards. And this is a great variation and a very common bebop device that Joe Pass, Charlie Parker and all the others use all the time. Now you can turn this into an exercise like this. And with this exercise, if you take the last C major 7 and just add a few chromatic passing notes, it instantly becomes a classic bebop phrase. Practicing pivot arpeggios not only helps you break out of predictable solo lines, it also gives your solos that signature bebop sound, full of leaps and inspiring rhythms. It is a small change to your practice that pays off with much more creative and authentic lines. In fact, you can turn any short phrase into an exercise. Let me show you. This is where things start to get really interesting, because now you can take any phrase that you like and turn it into a scale exercise. This lets you explore how the same lick or melody sounds on different chords. Now, as an example, you can combine the pivot arpeggio and the triplet with a leading note concept, and then create a short building block like this. Notice that this isn't a systematic way to combine two ideas, it's more about finding something that sounds good and what fits in the style. This line works beautiful in some bebop phrases, but first let's just take it through the C major scale. And besides getting more options for where you can use the phrase, you're also improving rhythm and phrasing like this. And here's where you can get creative. If you take the F major version of that and use it on a D minor 7 chord, you get a 2-5-1 line like this. Barry Harris' approach to practice connects your scales directly to the music, so every minute that you spend practicing actually pays off in your playing. But Wes Montgomery took this principle even further. Now, if you want to discover what Wes practiced and learn how to develop incredible melodic skills just like his, then check out this video. Learn jazz, make music.